As sports fans, we like to engage in debates about who was better, what team was better, what coach was better, what player was better, so on and so forth, what organization is better. And we love talking about the Hall of Fame because we love the history of the game, and we like talking about the legends of the past, those that we grew up on, those that we remember, and we like talking about who goes into the Hall of Fame, who doesn't, who isn't in that should be, who is in maybe sometimes that shouldn't be, and all of that. And I certainly acknowledge that sometimes it's a matter of taste, and sometimes it's a matter of perspective, and opinions can vary. And that's cool. It's nice to have different opinions about things. So every year when you hear the Pro Football Hall of Fame class, their new induction class is announced, you know that not everybody's going to agree. In part, that is a function of the fact that you have more than 5 worthy Hall of Fame finalists. That is also a reflection of, in some cases, people value different things in different players in different positions. May have axe to grind against certain players, may have a bias towards or against other players. All of that. So, I don't expect everybody to agree with me, nor should I be expected to agree with everybody else. However, son of a bitch, there should be some basic truths that we should be able to align to. And one of those basic truths this year with the 2022 Pro Football Hall of Fame induction class is that Bryant Young has absolutely no fucking business being in this class. We have to be able to agree on this, right? Like if you look at the 3 senior committee things. Dick Vermeil. I don't have a beef with him going in the Hall of Fame. But he wouldn't have been the coach that I would have focused on getting in the Hall of Fame first. That's just me. You could have talked about any number of guys. Dan Reeves, Buddy Parker, right? George Seifert. George Seifert won 2 Super Bowls as a head coach. Several more as a coordinator. Dick Vermeil deserves to be in, so I don't beef with that. I just say, wouldn't have been my personal first choice. Don Coryell, others that maybe either waited longer or I felt had stronger resumes. Cliff Branch should have been in long ago. It's a shame that he's not in live to enjoy this moment that was so rightfully deserved. As far as the whole inducting ahead of officiating like Art McNally, it's really weird optics when you look at the state of officiating in the NFL today. If he laid the foundation for this, why the fuck would you put him in the Hall of Fame? But he's an old guy and he's still alive, so I don't feel enough passion about it one way or another to really give a shit. But I will say for the modern era guys, 4 of them I have no beef with. Some I agree with now, and some I said, hey, could have waited a year or 2, doesn't matter to me. Leroy Butler should have already been in. He should have. He was the only first-team all-decade defensive player from the 70s through the 90s that was not already in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's your case. 4-time All-Pro first team, 4-time Pro Bowler, member of the 90s All-Decade first team. That's a Hall of Famer. Good. Tony Baselli had to wait several years. He's in. I'm good with that. Richard Seymour. Was impressed that he got in this year. I really was, because I would have thought with Seymour he might have had some challenges because of the lower sack numbers. But when you talk about a dynasty being underrepresented in the Hall of Fame, you look at that Patriots dynasty of the early mid-2000s. That doesn't mean I'm sitting there advocating for somebody like a Rodney fucking Harrison to get into the Hall of Fame. I mean, we got to have some standards here. It's not the Hall of Good or Very Good guys. It's the Hall of Fame. It's supposed to be the Hall of the greatest players of all time. Rodney Harrison ain't that. But you can certainly look at Richard Seymour and say he was such a key cog in what those Patriots did, especially on those first 3 Super Bowl teams. Yes, he belongs in Canton. And I was ecstatic as hell to see Sam Mills get his final props and due after waiting so many years. Unfortunately, another guy that's not here to, bask in the glory. But this was a guy that was all-time USFL. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler in the NFL, 1-time first-team All-Pro. He was a guy that was underrated and underappreciated throughout his career. He just was. He was the leader of those dome attack Saints defenses under Mora. When the Saints finally got to the playoffs a few times, then he went to Carolina. He was the first face of that franchise. Like, does it suck that it means guys with very strong resumes like Zach Thomas and Patrick Willis have to wait? Yes. But they'll get in. But Sam Mills, this is his last shot. He should have been in before, and he wasn't. So, like, I look at all those other ones, and I could say, personally, there might have been other people I put in. Like, you have Bears fans that are certainly raging about Devin Hester not being a first-ballot Hall of Famer. And look, I could have went either way with that. He'll get in eventually. He made it to the top 10 this time. Like, for him as a special teamer to get there, it's pretty damn impressive. But all of that changes when you start talking about Bryant Young being a fucking Hall of Famer. I'm sorry, but there was a period of time during his San Francisco career that I know we don't like to talk about this other guy because of the off-the-field shit, but on the field, it was Dana Stubblefield that was every bit as good. It was Dana Stubblefield that was actually Defensive Player of the Year, not damn Bryant Young. Bryant Young was like a 4-time Pro Bowler and a 1-time first-team All-Pro. And I know you can have your different opinions about whether the Pro Bowl matters or not, but it is one piece of the puzzle, one measure or reflection of the overall picture. Bryant Young was a good player. He was a pretty good player for a decent number of years. But holy Christ, if you talk about in that era of time, did you hold him in the same regard as a Warren Sapp? Did you hold him in the same regard as John Randall or other guys? Fuck no, you didn't. If you did, you're insane. Absolutely insane. So not only could he debate the merits of whether or not he was a Hall of Famer, you could absolutely look at the list of 15 finalists this year and, to me, make a distinction of there are 14 guys you can make a clear-cut case for the Hall of Fame, and then you've got fucking Bryant Young. This panel of 49 voters somehow landed on one of the 5 best guys was Bryant Young. What in the fuck is wrong with them? He certainly wasn't the best defensive player on the ballot. He certainly wasn't that. Richard Seymour, clearly better. DeMarcus Ware, clearly better. Zach Thomas, clearly better. You know what I mean? Like, I go on and on. I'm not a huge Jared Allen fan, but I think Jared Allen had more, impact than a Bryant Young ever did. Rondé Barber, better player. If your argument is, well, how many Buccaneers on that how many defensive Buccaneers do you want in the Hall of Fame from a group that won 1 Super Bowl? That's fair, but I would have said I'd have put in Rondé Barber before John Lynch. I certainly would have put in Leroy Butler before John Lynch. Just saying. But for crying out loud, he was nowhere near the best defensive player. And you cannot tell me honestly, objectively, when you look at the careers of a DeMarcus Ware and a Bryant Young, that you think Bryant Young was better? That you think Bryant Young had more impact than the DeMarcus Ware? Well, maybe they didn't feel DeMarcus Ware was a fucking first ballot guy. Okay, then you have so many other guys that you could have voted in. Even then, DeMarcus Ware was a 4-time first-team All-Pro. He has many first-team All-Pros as Bryant Young does goddamn Pro Bowls. DeMarcus Ware was a 9-time Pro Bowler. DeMarcus Ware was a legit elite edge rusher for a fucking decade in the league. For Christ's sakes, Bryant Young wasn't even the best 49ers defensive player on the ballot. I can't imagine looking at Bryant Young's resume, looking at Patrick Willis's resume, and saying, I've got one guy that clearly merits Hall of Fame consideration, even with the somewhat shorter career, and still played almost a decade. Instead, I'm going to go with Bryant Young. So for some of these other guys in this Hall of Fame class, if I saw a bunch of Bears fans bitching about Devin Hester not getting in, I'd tell them, shut the fuck up, he'll get in time. And it's just a matter of perspectives, and it's a matter of the process and how it works, and you're only going to make but so much history here. Give it time, it will happen. But now that you see a Bryant Young get it in, Bryant Young at no point in time was ever viewed as the best at his position in the National Football League. He wasn't. Devin Hester not only was considered the best at his position and what he did during his time, he's considered that for all time. And what's even more ridiculous about fucking Bryant Young is that he gets in, but a vastly superior player at defensive tackle like Kevin Williams doesn't? Excuse the fuck out of me. Kevin Williams wasn't even a damn finalist. But Bryant Young makes it? And even when you look at that all-90s, you're going to hear, well, he was on the 90s all-decade team. Well, so was Richmond Webb, and he was better at his position than a damn Bryant Young was. Steve Wisniewski certainly as hell was better at his position. I would argue guys like Carnell Lake and Neil Smith you think about before you think about a goddamn Bryant Young. I mean, good Christ. At some point in time, you have to have standards for the Hall of Fame. And if you feel like Bryant Young is a Hall of Famer, maybe you're happy here. But even for a lot of 49ers fans, I guarantee what the response is. Cool for BY, ... How did he get in over Patrick Willis? And that's the logical question to ask. Like, how the hell did you even look at this Hall of Fame class? And you say, okay, Tony Baselli is one thing. Leroy Butler. Sam Mills. Get that. How do you look at them, combined with Richard Seymour, and say that Bryant Young was the same level of player as Richard Seymour? Nobody with a brain would fucking say that. Christ's sakes. The whole second team all decade. Maybe that means you make it someday, but that doesn't mean you need to make it after just a few years, when you certainly were nowhere near. Basically what these Hall of Fame voters said. This is how stupid this sounds. It is. And we need to call it out. I don't know, this is some buddy boy shit. I don't know what the fuck this was. But they basically said to you that Bryant Young was a greater player in the pantheon of the NFL than Devin Hester. Fucking ridiculous. Said he was better than Andre Johnson, Torrey Holt, and Reggie Wayne. All equally ridiculous. He was better than Zach Thomas and goddamn Patrick Willis. Wasn't even the best 49er among the fucking finalists. Ridiculous. Willie Anderson, one of the greatest right tackles of all time. I would take him over Bryant Young, and I'm not even that sold on Willie Anderson's Hall of Fame status, frankly. Like, you could do this with all these guys around the ballot. Out of the 15 guys they had to choose from, the voters chose 4 worthy guys and the absolutely least deserving out of all of them. How does that happen? Fuck is wrong with them? And yes, it's fair to ask. If you as voters think that a Bryant Young was a better player than Rondé Barber or even a Jared Allen, what football have you been watching over the decades? Should you even have a vote at this point? Like, to me personally, I might have said, you know what? Leroy Butler to me was a lock this year. That would have been a guy that I'd have been pounding the table for. And that's as a Bears fan. That's how great he was. He deserves it. Baselli, I feel, Sam Mills, I was passionate about getting in because of the number of years that he was underrated. But if somebody said to me that they viewed Zach Thomas or Patrick Willis as more willing or more meriting and more deserving, I could get that and say, you know what, that makes sense to me. If somebody came back and said, I think Rondé Barber is one of the 5, okay, let's talk, because I might not disagree. If you said DeMarcus Ware, I'm like, you know what, would have been one of my 5 guys, because he was an elite player. Like, you see how we can have differences of opinion on different things, and I could be flexible, but there are just some things we shouldn't have to be flexible on. It's supposed to be the Hall of Fame, not the Hall of, they were pretty good. I never watched Bryant Young and said to me, that's a Hall of Famer. I watched Kevin Williams in Minnesota and said, that's a Hall of Famer. I watched Olin Kreutz. We want to talk about second team, all decade kind of guys. I watched Olin Kreutz and I said, to me, that might be a Hall of Famer. Lance Briggs might be a Hall of Famer. But even then I somewhat questioned, but at least I entertained the thought. I never entertained that thought with fucking Bryant Young, and I know a lot of people didn't either. Legitimately surprised. Sam Mills was a pleasant surprise. That was awesome. Putting in the absolute worst of the 15 finalists into Canton this year is not a pleasant surprise. Yes, this Hall of Fame class is underwhelming, and it ties largely to the fact, like I said, they put in the absolutely least qualified player this year. Makes no damn sense to me.